Understanding the science of influence is one of the most critical steps in protecting yourself from manipulation. To truly outsmart others and stay immune to control, you need to go beyond basic self-help ideas and examine how your brain and body respond to social and psychological influence. Manipulation is not always obvious. It often operates through subtle psychological mechanisms that target your biological wiring, particularly how your nervous system reacts to uncertainty, fear, or the need for belonging. At its core, manipulation is the strategic use of influence to get you to act against your best interests, while believing you are choosing freely. The first thing to recognize is that the human brain is wired for social survival. From an evolutionary perspective, being accepted by your group was critical to staying alive. This means that your brain is constantly scanning your environment for cues, facial expressions, tone of voice, posture, that signal either approval or threat. These cues trigger deep, automatic responses. When someone gives you a disapproving look, or you sense you're being left out, your limbic system interprets that as danger. This launches a stress response, your heart rate increases, cortisol is released, and your rational brain activity starts to shut down. In these moments, manipulators thrive. They don't overpower you with facts. They bypass your reasoning and exploit your emotions. Now here's where it gets scientific. The brain has multiple regions involved in influence and decision-making. The amygdala processes threats and emotional signals. The prefrontal cortex handles reasoning, logic, and long-term planning. When someone is trying to manipulate you, their success often depends on keeping you stuck in your emotional brain, away from your reasoning brain. They might create urgency, provoke guilt, flatter you excessively, or introduce confusing information. These tactics cause stress, which hijacks your executive function and makes you more compliant. And understanding this biological dynamic is the key to breaking free. When you know that your instinct to say yes to someone isn't necessarily coming from your values or logic, but from a fear of conflict or social rejection, you can begin to pause, assess, and choose differently. That pause is where your power lies. Recognizing manipulation in real time begins with recognizing your body's signals. Do you feel tense, pressured, guilty, without reason? Those are signs that your nervous system is being activated, and when that happens, your mind is more susceptible to outside influence. Another factor to consider is the concept of cognitive load. Manipulators often try to overwhelm your thinking by giving you too many details, switching topics rapidly, or appealing to authority. The more cognitively overloaded you are, the more likely you are to defer judgment and follow instruction. This tactic is used in high-pressure sales environments, abusive relationships, and even political propaganda. But when you understand that cognitive overload reduces your decision-making power, you can start to intentionally slow down your response. You can say, "Let me think about this," or "I need a moment," and give your brain the space it needs to regain clarity. Equally important is understanding how confirmation bias plays into manipulation. Your brain is naturally inclined to seek information that supports what you already believe. Manipulators know this. They may subtly affirm your fears or ideals to gain your trust and then direct your behavior in their favor. The antidote is intellectual humility, the willingness to question your own thoughts, slow down your emotional reactions, and analyze motivations, both yours and theirs. There is also the principle of reciprocity. This is a powerful psychological trigger where if someone gives you something, whether it's a compliment, a favor, or a small gift, you feel a subconscious urge to give back. Skilled manipulators use this often. But if you understand that reciprocity is an automatic response rather than a rational one, you can resist it when it's being used against you. Ultimately, the science of influence shows us that manipulation doesn't rely on force. It relies on exploiting how your brain naturally works. Once you become aware of these biological and psychological mechanisms, you can build a kind of mental immunity. You learn to detect the signals of influence, interrupt the automatic response, and redirect your mind toward logic, values, and awareness. This doesn't make you cold or closed off. It makes you clear, conscious, and far more difficult to control. And that is how you begin to outsmart manipulation, starting today. Building cognitive autonomy means developing the mental capacity to think clearly, independently, and critically, especially under pressure. It's the foundation of intellectual self-defense. In a world where influence is everywhere, cognitive autonomy acts like a firewall for your brain. It doesn't mean isolating yourself from others or refusing to listen to different perspectives. It means having the strength and clarity to filter those inputs through your own internal reasoning system, rather than simply reacting to them or absorbing them unconsciously. From a psychological standpoint, many people unknowingly give away their autonomy every day. They make decisions based on what others expect, what will get them the least resistance, or what makes them feel validated in the moment. This is natural, especially in environments that reward compliance and discourage self-examination. But when you constantly rely on external approval to guide your actions, you leave yourself open to manipulation. Anyone who understands your need for validation or fear of disapproval can easily steer your choices without your awareness. Cognitive autonomy requires training. One of the most effective ways to build it is by engaging in regular self-reflection. This means taking time each day to ask yourself, why did I say that? Why did I agree to that? Was that really my decision, or was I trying to avoid discomfort? These questions allow you to begin identifying where your thoughts and actions are truly yours and where they've been shaped by external pressure. Over time, this process builds a stronger sense of internal accountability. You begin to trust your own judgment, and that trust becomes your compass. Another critical aspect of cognitive autonomy is learning how to tolerate discomfort. Many people give up their autonomy not because they don't know what they want, but because asserting themselves feels emotionally uncomfortable. Saying no can feel risky. Expressing disagreement might cause tension. But cognitive autonomy is not about always being comfortable. It's about being stable and clear even in the presence of discomfort. The more you expose yourself to low-stakes situations where you assert your boundaries or express your authentic thoughts, the more resilient you become. Eventually, these moments of discomfort stop feeling like threats and start feeling like affirmations of your strength. In the brain, this kind of thinking is associated with strong activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for executive function. People who score high in autonomy also tend to have stronger working memory, better emotional regulation, and a more consistent sense of identity. These are not fixed traits. They can be developed through conscious effort. Practices like focused reading, writing, journaling, or engaging in thoughtful debate all help to train the mind to rely on internal logic rather than external cues. Another useful practice is decision journaling. This involves writing down important choices you make, the reasoning behind them, and how they turn out. Over time, you build a track record of your thinking process. This not only strengthens your trust in your own mind, but also helps you identify cognitive distortions, emotional biases, or external influences that may have swayed your decisions. With this self-awareness, you become far less susceptible to subtle persuasion or manipulation. Cognitive autonomy also involves filtering the information you consume. The media you watch, the people you surround yourself with, the voices you allow into your mind, these all shape your cognitive environment. If you constantly absorb emotionally charged content or surround yourself with people who reward conformity, your autonomy begins to erode. To counter this, choose input that challenges your thinking in constructive ways. Read authors who disagree with you. Ask hard questions. Seek truth, not just comfort. Ultimately, cognitive autonomy is the ability to stand in a noisy, demanding world and still hear your own voice. It's the ability to pause when others rush, to think when others react, and to decide based on clarity rather than fear. It doesn't mean you'll never be influenced. No one is completely immune to social forces, but it does mean you will recognize when influence is happening and choose how to respond. That choice is what separates a manipulated mind from a masterful one. And the more you practice autonomy, the stronger that mental muscle becomes. Until your thoughts, your direction, and your identity are yours alone. Mastering emotional regulation is one of the most powerful tools for resisting manipulation and regaining control of your decisions. At its core, manipulation often works not through logic or reason, but by hijacking your emotions. When someone can make you feel guilty, afraid, overly excited, ashamed, or indebted, they can influence your behavior without ever stating it directly. That's why people who lack emotional regulation are easier targets. They react quickly, speak impulsively, and make decisions under the influence of feelings rather than facts. But emotional regulation is not about suppressing emotions. It's about recognizing them in real time, understanding what they signal, and choosing your response with clarity. From a neuroscientific perspective, your emotional responses are processed in the limbic system, particularly in the amygdala. When you experience something that feels threatening, like a harsh tone, a disapproving glance, or even a carefully timed compliment, your brain evaluates whether it's safe or dangerous. If it senses a threat, it triggers a stress response. This increases your heart rate, narrows your attention, and decreases your capacity for complex thought. In that moment, the prefrontal cortex, which handles reasoning and long-term thinking, gets overridden. Second, you might lash out, freeze, people please, or agree to something just to relieve the discomfort. That's exactly what manipulators want. They rely on your emotional reactivity to bypass your rational thinking. To avoid this, you must develop the habit of pausing between stimulus and response. That pause is everything. It gives your thinking brain time to catch up with your emotional brain. It allows you to observe your emotions instead of becoming them. One of the most effective ways to build this skill is through breath work. Deep, slow breathing, especially with a longer exhale, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps calm the body and create space for thought. When you feel a surge of anxiety, guilt, or confusion in a conversation, simply taking 2 or 3 slow breaths can be enough to restore mental clarity and break the emotional trance. Emotional regulation also involves learning to label your emotions accurately. When you can name what you're feeling, this is embarrassment, this is anger, this is fear of rejection, you reduce its intensity. Neuroscience shows that labeling emotions activates regions of the brain associated with control and planning, decreasing activity in the emotional centers. This isn't just a psychological trick, it's a physiological shift. By becoming more emotionally literate, you develop the capacity to interpret your internal state and stop it from driving unconscious behavior. It's equally important to reframe your relationship with discomfort. Manipulators often rely on your aversion to discomfort, your desire to avoid conflict, your fear of awkward silence, your need to be seen as agreeable. If you can become more comfortable sitting with those emotions, they lose their power over you. The next time someone pressures you to make a decision quickly or uses guilt to sway you, try doing nothing. Just sit with the feeling. Don't explain. Don't rush. The ability to sit in silence, to say, "I'm not sure," or "let me get back to you," is a high-level emotional skill that protects you from making decisions based on temporary feelings. Another vital part of emotional regulation is learning to detach your identity from your emotion. You might feel fear, but you are not fear. You might feel anger, but you are not anger. This subtle shift helps you become the observer of your emotional landscape rather than the subject of it. It gives you space to decide how you want to respond. This space is what keeps you from being emotionally manipulated. The long-term development of this skill requires consistent practice. Meditation, journaling, and reflecting on emotional triggers from your day help build self-awareness. You begin to recognize patterns, certain people, topics, or tones that pull emotional reactions from you. When you can predict those triggers, you prepare for them. Over time, your nervous system becomes less reactive, more stable, and more grounded. In a world filled with emotional noise and psychological pressure, the ability to stay calm, observe your feelings, and respond intentionally is rare, but it's also trainable. Emotional regulation doesn't make you less human. It makes you more powerful. It doesn't remove your emotions. It puts you in charge of them. And when you can regulate your emotions in high-pressure moments, you take away the only tool most manipulators have, your unguarded reactions. Identifying the red flags of manipulative behavior is a crucial step in protecting your mental autonomy and making decisions based on clarity rather than coercion. Manipulation rarely begins with overt threats or obvious deceit. Instead, it's often subtle, disguised as kindness, concern, or even love. This subtlety is what makes it dangerous. Manipulators count on you not recognizing the signs until you're already entangled in their agenda. The more attuned you are to the patterns and behaviors that signal manipulation, the faster you can disengage, set boundaries, and protect your well-being. One of the most common red flags is excessive flattery. While genuine compliments are healthy and affirming, manipulative flattery goes a step further. It feels disproportionate to reality and often comes early in a relationship or interaction. You may hear things like, "You're the only one who understands me," or "No one else is as talented as you," before you've had time to earn that level of trust. The goal of this kind of praise is to create a sense of obligation and emotional dependence. It disarms your critical thinking by making you feel special, chosen, or superior. Once you buy into that feeling, the manipulator can more easily steer your actions, because you won't want to disappoint someone who sees you in such a glowing light. Another red flag is the creation of false urgency. Manipulators often pressure you to make quick decisions with phrases like, "You have to act now," or "This opportunity won't come again." By manufacturing a sense of scarcity or time pressure, they bypass your logical reasoning. The brain, when under time constraints, is more likely to go with instinct or emotion rather than a well-considered analysis. This tactic is widely used in sales, marketing, and toxic relationships. If someone is pushing you to decide before you're ready, especially if the consequences are serious, it's a sign that your autonomy is being challenged. Guilt tripping is another manipulation tactic that's easy to miss. A manipulator might say, "After everything I've done for you, you're really going to say no?" Or, "I just thought you were different from everyone else." These phrases are meant to make you question your integrity, kindness, or loyalty. They don't argue the facts or the logic. They attack your self-esteem. Once guilt sets in, it becomes easier to get you to comply because most people would rather betray their own interests than feel like they've let someone down. Recognizing guilt tactics as red flags allows you to pause and evaluate whether your decisions are truly yours or if they're being shaped by emotional blackmail. You should also watch for constant confusion or contradiction. Manipulators may frequently change their stories, twist your words, or deny things they previously said. This creates what is known as gaslighting, a psychological tactic used to make you question your memory, perception, or sanity. Over time, this wears down your confidence and makes you more dependent on the manipulator for what is real or true. If you often feel confused after conversations with a particular person, or if you find yourself apologizing for things you don't clearly remember doing, it's a strong sign that manipulation is at play. Another pattern to observe is when someone plays the victim consistently, even when they are in control. This may look like blaming others for their actions, avoiding accountability, or using emotional stories to justify poor behavior. The goal is to trigger your empathy so that you lower your guard and offer them support, forgiveness, or compliance. While empathy is a strength, when it's weaponized by a manipulator, it becomes a tool for control. Isolation is another major red flag. Manipulators often attempt to distance you from your support network, friends, family, or mentors, by subtly discrediting them or creating conflicts. They may say, "They're just jealous of you," or "They don't really understand you like I do." This cuts you off from reality checks and independent perspectives, making you more reliant on the manipulator for emotional and psychological validation. Lastly, be cautious of people who make everything transactional. If someone constantly reminds you of what they've done for you or keeps a mental scoreboard of favors and sacrifices, they may be using those gestures as leverage. Genuine support doesn't come with strings attached. If help or kindness always seems to come with an expectation, the real motive may not be generosity. It may be control. The most powerful defense against manipulation is awareness. By learning to recognize these behavioral patterns early, you gain the power to pause, think, and choose. You stop reacting on autopilot and you start responding from a place of clarity and strength. When you understand the red flags of manipulation, you no longer need to fear being taken advantage of. You'll see the game as it begins, and you'll have the strength to walk away before it ever gains power over you.
Enhancing situational awareness is like sharpening the lens through which you perceive the world. It's about becoming fully attuned to your environment, both physically and socially, so you can accurately interpret what's happening around you and respond effectively. People who lack situational awareness often find themselves blindsided by manipulation, subtle power dynamics, or emotional traps because they're only focused on what's being said, not how, why, or by whom. On the other hand, those who develop this awareness can detect shifts in energy, tone, or intention before anything even becomes obvious. They see the game before it's played, which makes them far less vulnerable to being controlled. To understand situational awareness, consider that most communication is nonverbal. Body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, and micro-behaviors carry more information than the actual words spoken. For example, someone might say they're fine, but their shoulders are tense, their jaw is clenched, or they avoid eye contact. A person with high situational awareness picks up on these inconsistencies. They don't take things at face value. They observe the full context. Manipulators often rely on others being too focused on words to notice these contradictions. They depend on people ignoring the undercurrents of conversation. But when you can pick up subtle signals like shifts in breathing, forced smiles, or nervous gestures, you start to see what others miss. Part of situational awareness involves reading the room. This means understanding the emotional temperature of a group, noticing who holds influence, who feels excluded, and how people are responding to each other. Manipulation often happens in group settings because the manipulator uses social pressure to sway individuals. If you aren't paying attention to these social currents, you might unconsciously go along with something just because the majority seems to. But if you are alert, you can step back mentally and ask yourself, is this person dominating the conversation? Is someone being silenced? Am I being rushed into agreement? That kind of reflective questioning is a sign of elevated awareness. Another layer of situational awareness is tracking patterns over time. Manipulative behavior often follows a cycle: charm, control, confusion, and guilt. Someone may start out overly friendly, then gradually begin pushing your boundaries, then leave you second-guessing your thoughts or actions, and finally make you feel responsible for their behavior. If you're not paying attention to the sequence, you might interpret each phase in isolation and miss the bigger picture. But someone with awareness starts to see the pattern emerge early and connects the dots. They don't just react to what's happening, they anticipate it. To build this skill, you must slow down your mental processing. Many people operate in a distracted, reactive state, scanning their phones, worrying about what to say next, or simply going through the motions of interaction. Manipulators thrive in those gaps. But when you train yourself to be fully present, to listen deeply, and to observe without judgment, you create a psychological buffer between yourself and potential influence. You begin to notice not just what someone says, but how your body responds when they speak. Do you feel drained, anxious, or off balance around certain individuals? That's information. Your nervous system often picks up on threats before your conscious mind can identify them. Enhancing situational awareness also involves understanding your own biases and triggers. If you have a strong need to be liked, for example, you may overlook manipulative behaviors just to maintain harmony. If you fear conflict, you may miss signs of boundary violations. Self-awareness and situational awareness go hand in hand. The clearer you are about your own internal state, the more accurately you can perceive external situations. Training this ability doesn't require a perfect memory or advanced intelligence. It requires attention. Try this exercise. After every interaction, mentally replay the conversation. What was the person's tone? Did their words align with their expressions? Were they overly eager? Did something feel rehearsed or too perfect? Over time, this habit teaches your brain to gather more nuanced data during live interaction. Ultimately, situational awareness is about seeing beneath the surface. It's not about being suspicious or paranoid. It's about being observant and grounded. When you walk into any room or interaction with your senses fully online, your mind fully present, and your intuition aligned with logic, you make it incredibly difficult for anyone to pull you into emotional or psychological traps. You stop reacting blindly and start responding wisely. That clarity, that stillness in motion is what makes you unshakable, and it's what allows you to outsmart any manipulator before they even make their move. Training your prefrontal cortex is essential for developing the mental strength needed to resist manipulation and make intelligent, deliberate decisions. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for executive functions, planning, impulse control, critical thinking, and emotional regulation. It's the command center that helps you weigh long-term consequences over short-term gratification. When this area is strong and well-regulated, you're far less likely to be swayed by emotional pressure, confusion, or social influence. But when it's underdeveloped or weakened, often due to stress, fatigue, or chronic distraction, you become more reactive and susceptible to manipulation. The good news is that, like a muscle, the prefrontal cortex can be trained, strengthened, and optimized through consistent effort and intentional habits. One of the most effective ways to train this brain region is by engaging in activities that require sustained attention and delayed gratification. These include focused reading, problem-solving, exercises, long-form writing, or learning a new skill that requires discipline. Every time you resist the impulse to check your phone or avoid a task in favor of something easier, you're reinforcing the neural circuits responsible for self-control. Over time, this improves your ability to think clearly in situations where emotions run high or where others are trying to influence your behavior through pressure or reward. Another powerful method is cold exposure, or deliberate discomfort, such as cold showers, exercise in difficult conditions, or other controlled stressors. These activities trigger a mild stress response, forcing the brain to regulate discomfort while staying calm and present. This builds resilience, and more importantly, it teaches your nervous system how to stay balanced under pressure, an ability that directly supports executive function. When someone tries to manipulate you through urgency or intimidation, you're less likely to panic or make rushed decisions because your brain has practiced maintaining composure under stress. Mindfulness and focused attention meditation are also highly effective in strengthening the prefrontal cortex. These practices require you to focus on one thing, your breath, a sound, or a sensation, while gently redirecting your attention whenever your mind wanders. That repeated act of noticing distraction and returning focus is like a workout for your attention systems. Over time, you become more present, more grounded, and more capable of detecting subtle, emotional, and mental shifts in both yourself and others. This kind of presence makes it much harder for someone to subtly manipulate you because you're fully aware of what's happening in real time. Sleep is another overlooked factor. Chronic sleep deprivation shrinks the functional capacity of the prefrontal cortex and increases emotional reactivity. This means your brain becomes more impulsive, more sensitive to stress, and less able to critically assess information or intentions. If you want to resist psychological influence and maintain clear, independent thinking, high-quality sleep must be a non-negotiable part of your strategy. Your brain needs recovery to process information, build new connections, and strengthen the neural pathways responsible for discernment and control. You also train your prefrontal cortex by making values-based decisions. Every time you make a choice that aligns with your long-term goals rather than your immediate emotional needs, you're reinforcing the brain's ability to lead from logic rather than emotion. For example, setting boundaries, saying no when it's uncomfortable, or standing firm in your principles under social pressure are all moments where your executive brain overrides primitive instincts for safety or approval. These decisions may feel difficult in the short term, but they build mental integrity and long-term cognitive freedom. Furthermore, reflection and self-evaluation help consolidate learning and strengthen neural connections. Journaling about difficult conversations, analyzing your decision-making process, or asking yourself, did I act according to my values, allows you to integrate experience into wisdom. The more reflective your mind becomes, the sharper your reasoning gets, and the more resistant you are to subtle forms of influence. In today's world where attention is fragmented and emotional manipulation is everywhere, from advertising to personal relationships, training the prefrontal cortex is no longer optional. It's foundational. It is the part of you that sees through illusion, slows down when the world speeds up, and protects your clarity under pressure. Spirit, 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 spirit. When this part of your brain is active and strong, you become unshakable. You don't just avoid being manipulated. You move through life with purpose, with presence, and with power that can't be bought, swayed, or broken.